Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Really do appreciate your patience this week. I had a little bit of a scheduling conflict on Tuesday, which is why you did not see a United States heating and cooling degree day forecast update. But fear not, this is coming out as of Wednesday. And as a reminder, we will be publishing a Thursday weather discussion focused once again on Europe. I've gotten a lot of feedback about that, and so far from what I've gauged from you folks at Energy Rogue is that you do like the separate videos between the two. Because, before I was neglecting Europe quite a bit, and it is very important for a lot of reasons in the case of energy and nat gas trading. So we have decided, as of the last couple of weeks, to have two separate videos. One focused primarily on North America with an emphasis on the United States, but then also a separate video, which would come out on Thursdays, for European weather. So like I said, seems as though from the general feedback and responses I've gotten that it's something that you guys want me to continue to do. So unless if I hear otherwise, that's exactly what we are going to do moving forward, is have those two separate videos released. Also, I am going to be posting some polls in the Discord, and they're just going to be some general questions. Before I made one of those Google surveys, but I think we get more responses when those questions are posted directly in Discord and it's not so overwhelming. So be on the lookout for those two. I'm just going to be getting some more feedback on the current weather product as it relates to these videos, as well as what we have posted on wxrogue.com. Anyhow, let's get started with tonight's video. So in tonight's discussion, we are going to be focusing primarily on probably the biggest elephant in the room, which is this cold air regime that is going to make its way towards much of the central United States and really the eastern half of the United States once this is all said and done. And this is expected to kick off around late this weekend into early next week and actually continue well into the middle of next week. More on that a little bit later on, but that is our focus point number one. And then focus point number two, which we won't go into a lot of detail about, is the tropical developments in the Caribbean. We are monitoring the potential for our next hurricane in the Gulf, what is likely to be our last hurricane of the season. Cross our fingers on that, but by the looks of it, seems as though we're starting to wind down climatologically speaking. We are towards the latter half of the season, that final home stretch, so there's only so much energy that these storms can tap into at this point in the season. Therefore, we are expecting that this is going to be one of, if not the last system to truly impact the Gulf. If that comes to fruition, that would be our next hurricane. It would be Hurricane Sarah. And the implications could be anywhere along the Florida coast and even up towards the panhandles. We'll also get into that a little bit later on. Let's begin first in our video discussion by talking about the temperature regime. This map you're looking at here is the GFS 500 millibar height map. This, in fancy terms, is really referring to our jet stream map. These colors that you see are not representative of temperature, but rather geopotential height. For the sake of tonight's discussion, I'm not going to go into geopotential height. I'm happy to have that conversation sort of off stream, if you will. But in the meantime, just know that this map is indicating the jet stream. Now, the nice thing about it is you can also have depicted here, or we do have depicted here, our pressure systems. So we have high pressure out towards the Rockies. As of tonight, we also have a couple of low pressure systems that are currently near Quebec as well as Ontario. And then, of course, another low pressure system out towards British Columbia. So what the storyline has been leading up to this point is this progressive pattern that I keep talking about. And when we talk about progressive, that really translates to volatility, right? And for those of you folks here that are new, that have just recently subscribed, just a quick little debrief on what I'm talking about. When we refer to a progressive pattern, we're really talking about a jet stream that looks something like this. You got a lot of peaks and valleys. And in those peaks and valleys, you have areas of high pressure and low pressure and high pressure and low pressure. And you see with that, because our winds in the northern hemisphere move from west to east, that you see a lot of fluctuation. So if it's going to be hot one day, well, it's going to be colder the next. So a lot of variation in temperature is typically what follows a progressive pattern. If we're talking more along the lines of a zonal pattern, it's quite the opposite of that. It's more of a just horizontal line at best. Again, winds still move from west to east in the northern hemisphere, but the difference is you don't have a lot of that oscillating taking place. And instead, it's just pretty much a linear, almost horizontal line from west to east. And so this kind of pattern, when we're talking about zonal, usually implies milder temperatures, not much variation, a lot of the country feeling mostly the same in terms of the weather pattern itself. But right now, and as has been the case the last couple of weeks, we are dealing with a progressive pattern. And in that case, it really shouldn't surprise us in the slightest that we're going to see something to this effect of a cold air regime. Now, I will say, my prediction was calling for some cold air advection to finally move through on the first week of December. By the looks of it, I might be off by about a week or two. But here we go. Let's take a look here and show you. And actually, let's go ahead and zoom out. I think that gives you a better viewpoint or vantage point of what we're looking at. And we'll look here at North America. So all these different lows that you see are what we call circumpolar lows. Okay. Now these circumpolar lows is what the media refers to as Arctic blast or polar vortex. What they're really saying on TV or in the different mediums you get your social or your news from is that these are really just circumpolar lows. And these circumpolar lows, as you might expect, they circulate the North Pole, right? So how we get cold air to advect further south usually requires something called a Greenland block. A Greenland block is essentially a blocking pattern, mostly of high pressure, that sits near Greenland, right? And by the way, that's not drawn to scale. Greenland is a little bit further north, right? So we're talking well up to the north of the pole there. So what that does is when you have a Greenland block or an area of high pressure, that helps to dislodge one of these circumpolar lows all the way further south, almost equatorward, and it brings cold air to a large swath of the country. It's exactly what's going to be happening here this week. So let's go ahead and play this out. Keep an eye on that, right? I mentioned the Greenland block. Pay close attention to Greenland. Pay close attention to these lows as we go forward in time. So as we look towards Greenland, you can begin to see that high pressure build and thereby bring colder air further south. Again, I wasn't really anticipating a Greenland block setup this early, but here we are. And of course, as that high pressure begins to build, you see all this cold air getting displaced further south. By the way, this takes us into this Sunday, but as we head even further into what would be Tuesday, Wednesday, look at that, right? So let's just play that back one more time. You see that low pressure that forms right here in the Midwest. That's bringing a lot of cold air down. And look at that, folks. You got a crap ton of high pressure that's building off towards Greenland, continuing throughout next week. And that's going to allow for these circumpolar lows to keep advecting further south into what will be, again, early next week and then well into the middle of next week as well. And so as we go forward in time, you can see that by the time we get to Friday, and really this would be Thursday, I should say, you see that that cold air is expanding all the way as far south as the Gulf. We could even see freezing morning lows as far south as Alabama and Mississippi, some of those larger population areas. If we take this a step further, though, and we head beyond, say, Thursday of next week, we see that continuation taking place, but then things start to warm up a bit. So, for my energy nat gas traders out there, for those of you that truly follow the weather, bear in mind, I think the biggest question that you may have right now is what happens beyond this cold air regime? And to that, I would say, at the moment, I think and I believe that we will see a rebound in those temperatures again. I'm not saying that they're going to rebound to where we're at today, but rather more to that milder temperature regime. That being said, my prediction still stands for much of the month of December, which is I truly believe that for the northern half of the United States. I'm talking about the Midwest, the upper Midwest and New England. These are going to be areas you need to watch closely because they will be highly prone to more of these cold air episodes. I still also predict, in addition to that at some point this season, aside from what we're going to see later on this week into next week, I still believe that areas like Texas and Oklahoma will see a significant cold air blast this year. I would even match it to the likes of 2021, which I know is a very bullish prediction, but based upon what I'm seeing, based upon us going back into La Nina and the current parameter space that we're in, the current environment we're in, it's really not out of the question to see something like that at some point this season. But in a long-winded answer, let me shorten that up. Here's what we're on tap for this week into next. Not expecting the cold air to really set in until late this weekend into early next week. And that should extend itself into the middle of next week before we eventually see a bit of a moderation take place as that Greenland block does decay by late next week. Right? So this is a relatively short-lived event, but it's a longer lasting one in terms of what we've experienced this far this year. So that's number one. Number two, when we go into December, I am expecting this episodic cold air to become more problematic, especially for the area that is circled here in black, with the isolated possibility of at least one significant Arctic blast that gets as far south as the Red River Valley at some point this season. And I would even go as far as saying around January and February should be the case for that. So we're going to see a lot of changing taking place. We're going to see that cold air really set in here over that next, coming up into next week, and then some moderation. But folks, don't let that fool you. I know, last couple of years, those HDD values have slowly dwindled a bit since, say, 2022. But we are also in a La Nina regime, which historically does tend to be colder. I know those seasons have been mild the last few, but based upon the sort of snowpack that's building, the ice sheets that are building up towards the northern pole, as well as our snowpack that continues to build out towards the Rockies, it is giving signs of more of a bullish winter than what we've seen the last few years. I know that might be a little bit contradictory to what you've heard. You're hearing more about more of this mild winter. Yes, you can make that argument for the southern United States, but New England, Midwest, upper Midwest are those key areas that we watch for in a La Nina setup. That takes care of the temperature discussion. And actually, before I go on to the tropics, let me just recap this by showing you the temperature anomaly map. And I think this really underscores where we're heading. And we are looking at the GFS model for context, but these temperature anomalies are telling us how much above or below normal those temperatures are forecasted to be. So as we go into later on this week, we are not done with those above normal temperatures. We're going to be experiencing that for a lot of the country, especially the Midwest and the Gulf, even up towards the northern Rockies. But watch what happens once we get that little Greenland block to set up here and bring down some of that cold air. You're going to see a lot of blue on this map here once we get towards that weekend into next week. So one more shot at warm air, really warm, well above normal as we head into possibly extending into early next week. But watch what happens. There's that cold air funneling right down into much of the United States. I mean, we're talking about the plains, the Gulf, the Northeast. I mean, it's pretty much everybody east of the west of the Great Divide that's going to be experiencing some of those well below normal temperatures on the back end of a cold front. And of course, there could also be some lake effect snow that's possible. We're actually expecting what could be a potentially significant lake effect snow event for the UP, as well as places east of Lake Michigan like Grand Rapids. You get those really warm lake temperatures, couple that with strong cold air advection over the lake, you get enough fetch, and then you get yourself a snowmaker, and that is certainly in the cards for next week. On the fly, I do want to make a quick correction. I do apologize to do this, but I mentioned just moments ago that we're expecting this cold air to set in around early next week. I would actually make the argument that it'll be right around like Tuesday to Wednesday is when it truly sets in. So apologies on the timing there, but hopefully you guys follow that okay. Also, you can track this along at wxrogue.com and see those HDD values. Okay, last but not least, let me show you the other situation we're tracking in the meteorology world, and that is potential tropical cyclone 19. And I believe this is the one. Yes, it is. This is potential tropical storm 19. So right now at the moment, it's currently struggling quite a bit. It's dealing with likely some dry air and shear, or a combination of both, as that continues to move towards the Yucatan. This is expected to eventually move off towards the north and east. We talked just now about that massive cold front. Well, that system is going to be responsible for steering it well off to the north and northeast. Now, the reason why I'm not going into this in full detail tonight is because there is a ton of variability with this thing. We're going to be interacting with land here over the next pretty much 72 to 96 hours, well into the weekend. This is rough terrain. System's going to be having to work against friction and some of that rough topography before it then spits out the other side into the Gulf. I certainly do anticipate, though, that the central Gulf of Mexico will be dealing with some impacts. To what degree, I am not sure. But I will say that impacts are likely in some form, because it is expected to move right within that, call it the South Central Gulf region, before it is then expected to make its way towards Florida. And as I say that, I want to be careful, right? Look at the spread here. This is the model, every single model that we have under our GEFS ensemble. Remember, a GEFS ensemble is 20 different renditions or 20 different interpretations of a model. And look at this spread. I mean, this is incredibly uncertain, which is why I'm not talking about it that much. Again, I certainly see some degree of impacts in the Gulf, depending on the degree of which we see. Some impacts, of course, are likely, but the spread of where it goes beyond early next week, as you can tell, it looks like a 5-year-old drew all over this map. It is just a complete uncertainty, and I'm actually quite surprised. There's been some folks in the community, but also others on social media platforms already dubbing this Hurricane Sarah, and while that is our next named storm, if it does in fact become Sarah, I think a lot of this conversation is incredibly premature, considering our current data spread is so all over the board. And a lot of it is going to be contingent on what happens here, as I said, over the next 72 to 96 hours. But just like with our CDD and HDD, forecasts will also be keeping track of the tropics too over these next few days and monitoring that very closely. If anything does change, especially if we're talking about potential impacts to Florida and even the Panhandle, we'll be sure to keep you updated throughout this weekend. Listen, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, feel free to post those down in the Weather Rogue Discord channel located in the Energy Rogue Discord server. And if you haven't had the opportunity, be sure to check out wxrogue.com. This platform at the moment is free. We are continuing to add additional products to this page, and it is a wonderful resource to use if you're interested in tracking some of these more specific metrics with weather as it relates to energy nat gas, such as population-weighted cooling heating degree days, gas-weighted degree days for these EIA regions. And of course, we also put out this frequent video content. And as I said, if you have any questions that come up, post those down in the Weather Rogue Discord. I'm always around to answer any questions that you guys do have. Listen, as I said, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next video tomorrow talking about European weather. Take care.